Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm Gayatri, your host, and today we are moving into episode 14 within our season 3 of Catalyze Your Self when self trust is absent. This season, we have been spending time with different ways pressure can affect our relationship with ourself, how it can change our pace, how it can narrow our discernment, how it can influence what we tolerate, what we avoid, what we hold, and what we express. And today we're going to stay with another deeply human experience that can show up when pressure is present. The experience of sensing something within ourselves and still hesitating to trust it. This is an important part of strengthening our mind because self-trust is often misunderstood as certainty. We can believe self-trust means we know exactly what to do, or that we should never question ourselves, or that trusting ourselves means every single internal signal is immediately ready to be turned into a decision or an action. In our day-to-day, though, as it is with all of it that is simply being human, it is so much more nuanced than that. Self-trust is the relationship we have with our own internal signals. It is how we respect what our internal world shows us. It is how we stay with that of what our body is communicating to us. It is how our cognition makes space to evaluate signals and information coming from all parts of our mind. It is how our consciousness notices a pattern, a shift, or a truth that may not have yet full ability to express itself, to show us how it matters. When self-trust is present, we can still pause and reflect. We can still take in more information. We can still listen to someone else's perspective. The difference is that our own inner signal remains part of that conversation. We do not just hand our knowing away simply because someone else sounds so much more confident or so much more certain. We do not dismiss what our body has registered because we cannot yet fully explain it perfectly. We do not silence what feels misaligned because someone else is comfortable with it or uncomfortable with it. Self-trust allows us to consider what is outside of us without disconnecting from what is happening within us. We allow what is happening inside of us to participate in our discernment. And when self-trust is absent, our signals may all be there. Our body may still tighten. Our emotions may still give us feelings of discomfort. Our awareness may still notice that something may not be fully aligned. But instead of staying with it long enough to understand what it is trying to show us, we just move away from it. We minimize it. We explain it away. We wait for someone else to confirm it before we can allow it to feel valid. Whether we trust ourselves or not can even impact the quality of our own self-reflections. When self-trust is active, our reflections deepen our awareness. And when self-trust is absent, self-reflection can become a way to distance ourselves from what we already sense. And this can happen so subtly, so quietly. We may notice repeated behavior from someone and still question whether the pattern is real or our imagination or our exaggerations. We may feel heaviness before a decision and immediately look for a logical reason to override it. We may sense that our yes was never aligned, but we may still wait for someone else to give us permission to say no. We may know something inside of us is asking us to stop, but we may move forward anyway because the outside world sounds so much more certain, so much more confident than we feel. When self-trust is absent, pressure has a way of making our external world louder. Timelines become louder, expectations become louder, other people's reactions become louder, the fear of disappointing someone becomes louder. So we can start allowing everything else to guide us through life rather than ourselves. And when this pattern repeats, the relationship with our inner knowing begins to weaken. We start needing more evidence before we honor what we feel. We start needing more agreement before we trust what we see. We start needing more reassurance before we allow our own clarity to have authority. Absence of self-trust is not simply indecision. It is not simply insecurity. And it is not even simply a lack of confidence. It is the result of a long-standing pattern where our inner signals were dismissed, questioned, overridden, or made less important than what someone else needed, expected, preferred, or believed. Self-trust is typically not lost in one grandiose moment. We learned over time to look outside of ourselves before we listened within. We learned to measure our truth through someone else's response. We learned to soften our knowing if it created discomfort for the world around us. We learned to question our discomfort if others seemed comfortable with what is happening. We learned to wait for proof even when our body had already begun signaling that something needed our attention. So let us stay with this and define self-trust in a way that is grounded in how our mind and nervous system and body work. Self-trust begins with our willingness to treat information that is coming up within our mind, our body, our nervous system as worthy of our respect and attention. And this does not mean every signal becomes a decision. It means every signal is allowed to enter into our awareness before we dismiss it and explain it away or hand it over to someone else to validate. Our internal world communicates in more than one way. Our cognition gives us language, logic, interpretation, and the ability to evaluate. Our emotions give us signals about meaning, safety, value, discomfort, connection, misalignment, impact. Our consciousness allows us to observe what is happening within us, including the part of us that may be operating from patterns and habits, old fear, or deep knowing. And our nervous system and body respond to what we are experiencing, often way before all parts of our mind has fully organized language and words around it. Self-trust is the relationship that allows all of this information to stay in conversation, so we are able to make the right discernment for us in the moment that we are in our now. Because self-trust is not blind agreement with every impulse we have. Discernment lets us evaluate what the signal means, where it is coming from, and what responses aligned. And this will ask us for a few additional inner conditions. This would ask for honesty, because we cannot trust ourselves if we keep editing what we know to make it more acceptable. This would ask for curiosity, so we can stay with the signal long enough to understand it without rushing to action, or dismissing it. This would ask for compassion because harshness and judgment can make self-trust collapse. If every signal is met with criticism, our inner world stops feeling safe, psychologically safe enough to speak clearly. This would ask for patience because self-trust often forms before we are certain. We must allow space for our cognition, our emotion, our consciousness, our nervous system, our body to bring the full picture forward. And this would ask for courage because trusting ourselves often asks us to honor something before the outside world validates it, regardless of if the outside world validates it. And this would ask for consistency because trust is built through repetition. We learn to trust ourselves when we repeatedly listen, evaluate, and respond without abandoning ourselves. These inner conditions allow us to say that my body is responding. Let me notice that. It allows us to say, I feel an emotion coming up. Let me understand what it's trying to tell me. It allows us to say, my thoughts are moving so quickly. Let me see whether they're helping me discern or if it's trying to help me avoid something. It allows us to say, I'm sensing a pattern here. Let me stay with this long enough so I can come to some sort of clarity about it. This is why self-trust and discernment are so closely connected. Self-trust gives our inner signals permission to be heard, and discernment helps us understand what to do with it. Without self-trust, discernment becomes incomplete because parts of our inner experiences are being dismissed before we have a chance to understand it. Without discernment, self-trust can become impulsive because we may act from a signal before we have understood its source, timing, and relevance to the moment we are in. This is also why self-trust does not immediately require action, and it does not immediately require certainty. In many moments, certainty may not be available right away. We may need the time and the space. We may need more context. We may need another conversation for more clarity. We may need to step back and sense what remains true once the intensity of that moment settles. Self-trust is what allows us to remain connected to ourselves during this entire process. It's the difference between saying, I don't know, so nothing my mind and body tells me at this time matters, and saying, I do not know yet, and what I'm sensing from my mind and body still needs to be part of what I need to understand for my ultimate clarity. This is a very different internal posture. One dismisses ourself. The other stays in relationship with ourself. And for many of us, this is where our work becomes so deeply personal because we may not have learned to stay in relationship with our own signals. We may have learned to override them. So let us slow down and stay here for a moment because self-trust is typically not weakened in isolation. It is learned through our experiences, repeated experiences, moments where something inside of us registered and the world around us taught us to question it, to dismiss it, and not listen to it. There are two types of experiences that typically start weakening self-trust. The first is when what we sense is repeatedly dismissed or corrected by others. And this can begin in small ways. And sometimes we do not recognize the impact of it until much later. We may sense that something feels uncomfortable, then we are told we are overreacting. We may notice that someone's behavior does not align with their words, and then we are told we are imagining things. We may feel hurt by something that has happened, and then someone explains to us why we should not feel hurt. Over time, the issue is no longer only the original moment. The issue becomes what we start learning about our own signals. We begin to wonder if our discomfort is reliable. We begin to question whether what we noticed was actually there. We begin to treat our own emotional responses as something that needs to be defended rather than understood. This is especially powerful when the person that is dismissing our signal carries a certain level of authority in our life or some sort of importance in our life. Could be a parent, a family member, a teacher, a leader, a partner, someone whose response matters to our sense of belonging, safety, approval, or stability. And in those moments, our nervous system learns, and it learns quickly. If what I sensed created conflict, maybe it is not safe for us to sense it so clearly in the first place. If what I felt gets dismissed, maybe it is safer to minimize it before anyone else does. If calling out what I experienced creates tension and stress, maybe it's just safer to wait until someone else agrees before I trust myself. And this is how self-trust begins to weaken because our internal signals were repeatedly met with either rejection or correction before it was met with care. And when that happens long enough, we may begin correcting ourselves internally before anyone else has to. We may become the one who says, maybe I'm making too much of this. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe this does not matter. Maybe I should just let it go. And the second type of experience that weakens self-trust is when external certainty begins to feel much safer than our own internal knowing. And this can happen when we are surrounded by people or systems that move with strong confidence, strong opinions, strong urgency, strong emotional reactions. The certainty that comes from outside of us can feel so loud that our own signals begin to feel very small in comparison. Someone speaks with authority and we question what we know. Someone reacts with intensity and we begin to adjust ourselves around that reaction. A timeline becomes urgent for someone else and we stop checking whether that time is actually aligned for us. A group we are part of seems very confident and then we begin to doubt the discomfort that we are feeling. A leader presents a direction with absolute certainty, and we silence the concern that is rising within us. In these moments, our nervous system is not only listening to the words being spoken, it is reading the environment. It is assessing risk. It is looking for safety. And if the external environment feels more powerful than our internal steadiness, our nervous system may decide that following the outside cue is safer than staying with our own internal signals. And this is where another person's certainty can begin to replace our discernment. It may not even be because they are right. It may simply be because they are louder, faster, more forceful, more comfortable taking space, and more practiced at presenting their perspective as truth. And when we have not built a strong enough relationship with our own inner signals, that external certainty can feel convincing. Not because our inner knowing has disappeared, because we have not yet learned to hold it steady in the presence of someone else's confidence. And this can happen in leadership spaces, it can happen in family dynamics, it can happen in friendship, it can happen in cultural dynamics, it can happen anywhere. The external voice carries more force than our internal world. And if we repeat this multiple times, many times, we start waiting for external certainty before we allow ourselves to trust what we sense. We will wait for someone else to call it out, someone else to agree. We may wait until the consequences become very obvious. And these experiences, having our signals dismissed, needing to abandon ourselves to preserve some connection with others, allowing external certainty to become safer than our internal knowing, can all quietly teach us to distrust ourselves. When what we sense is repeatedly dismissed or corrected by others, this teaches us to question the validity of our internal signal. And our subconscious and nervous system's learning becomes, what I sense may not be accurate. And when external certainty begins to feel safer than our own inner knowing, this also teaches us to question the authority of our inner signals. And our learning for our subconscious and nervous system becomes, what I sense may not matter because it is very much less certain than what someone else seems to know. Together, these two wreak absolute havoc on our self-trust. The first is weakening our trust in our perception, and the second is weakening our trust in our inner authority. And from here, we find ourselves at the place where we stop honoring the information and the signals that are all parts of our mind, body, and nervous system is trying to bring to us. We minimize them. We disrespect them. We wait for outside information and confirmation. We move away from what we know. We abandon ourselves, our inner signals before understanding. And net result of it all for ourselves, our trust is now absent. And with that, we come to the close of today's episode. In this episode, we stayed with what happens when self-trust is absent. As a result of a relationship with our inner signals that may have weakened over time. We looked at self-trust as the relationship we have with what rises within our mind, our nervous system, and our body. The relationship that allows us to respect what we sense, pay attention to it, stay honest with it, remain curious about it, meet it with compassion, give it patience, honor it with courage, and strengthen it through consistency. And we also looked at why self-trust and discernment are so deeply connected. Self-trust allows our inner signals to be heard, and discernment helps us understand what that signal means, from where it may be coming from, and what response is aligned with the moment we are in. When these two are working together, we do not have to rush into action simply because something inside of us is responding to us. And we also do not have to abandon what we sense simply because it has not been fully explained. We can stay with ourselves long enough for clarity to form. We also looked at two of the experiences that can quietly teach us to distrust ourselves. When what we sense is repeatedly dismissed or corrected by others, we can begin to question the validity of our own perception. And when external certainty begins to feel safer than our own inner knowing, we can begin to question our own inner authority. Over time, these experiences can change how we relate to ourselves. We may start to wait for proof before we honor what we feel. We may wait for agreement before we trust what we see. We may wait for reassurance before we allow our own clarity to matter. And as we touched on this entire season, as we dove into each of these patterns under pressure, we can return back to conscious presence of mind that self-trust makes possible by not forcing ourselves into certainty. Our work is to rebuild our strength and relationship with ourselves so that we do not dismiss what rises within us before we understand it. So, as we close today, as always, I want us to invite us to sit with a few reflective considerations. Where have we learned to dismiss what we sense before we listen to it? Where do we wait for someone else's certainty before allowing our own knowing to matter? And what would it look like in one small moment this week, today, perhaps, to let our inner signal remain part of the conversations in our internal world? Our goal would not be to force action, create conflict, or prove anything. What if we keep our goal simply to stay in relationship with ourselves long enough to hear what is asking for our attention? Because every time we listen without abandoning ourself, our self-trust strengthens. Every time we allow what we sense to participate in our discernment, self-trust strengthens. Every time we stay with ourselves through uncertainty, self-trust strengthens. And over time, this is how our inner authority returns. Quietly, consistently, through the repeated experience of knowing that we will not abandon ourselves simply because what we sense is uncomfortable, inconvenient, or not yet fully validated by the world around us. And if this episode resonated with you, I invite you to stay connected with me. Share your reflections through the platform where you're listening from, or reach out to me directly. Your reflections continue to deepen this shared journey, and this may be exactly what someone else needs to hear as they strengthen their own relationship with their self. And in our next episode, we will continue this exploration with episode 15, when our discomfort becomes our guardrail. We will look at how discomfort can begin to shape the boundaries of what we allow ourselves to choose, express, pursue, or even consider. And how under pressure, we may start treating discomfort itself as the reason to stop, put that wall up that can keep us comfortable and safe. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Gayatri, and until next time, let us continue strengthening our mind, listening with honesty to what all parts of our mind have been signaling to us, and stay connected to ourselves as we move through life, even under pressure.